first verse. Nebuchadnezzar, the king unto all people, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, peace be multiplied unto you. I thought it good to show the signs and wonders that the high God hath wrought toward me. How great are his signs, and how mighty are his wonders. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and his dominion is from generation to generation. Notice the difference between the last of chapter 3 and the beginning of chapter 4. Obviously, something has happened to Nebuchadnezzar that brings some kind of revelation to him about who God is and what God has in store for humanity. This is a letter that Nebuchadnezzar is sending out. Now notice, first thing we notice here, he sends this to all people, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth. Peace be multiplied unto you. So he wasn't just sending this to his realm, his area of ruling, to the Babylonians or just to his area. He sent this to all nations, all peoples. This was an open letter that he sent out so everybody in the entire world who could see this or hear of it would know what happened to him. You could say that he was one of the first evangelists in one sense of the word. Truly one of the first maybe tele-evangelists. We could kind of look at it that way if they'd had TV. We had the prophets, but the prophets all wrote to the children of Israel. And even Daniel, his stuff was all to the children of Israel. Of course, today with modern technology, it has grown the church and so forth. But in those days, they wrote to a specific people. As far as I know, this is the first instance we have in the Word where somebody who had the means to do so broadcast something as fantastic and miraculous as what we're going to read about tonight to the entire world with the intent that peace would be multiplied unto them. So there was some reasoning behind what Nebuchadnezzar did. And by the way, this was really kind of uncharacteristic of Nebuchadnezzar, because we've already seen he was a pretty boastful and proud guy. He was pretty proud of what he'd done. And to go out and broadcast to the whole world what had happened to him and put himself in a position of humbleness was completely uncharacteristic for him. Okay, so that's kind of what's going on. Notice what it says. I thought it good to show the signs and wonders that the high God hath wrought toward me. I thought that this was something I needed to do. It was something I felt at peace to do. Sometimes we get made to do things, and sometimes it's advantageous for us to do things because we get something in return. But the word that's used here means that he just thought it was something he should do. Maybe from an ethical standpoint, that he should let the world know what happens, because that way, at least they had a warning not to follow in his footsteps and end up where he ended up. Okay? Notice what he says. How great are his signs. How great are his signs. This is almost, could be taken out of Psalms, couldn't it? Because David talked this way. How great are the wonders. And you read about in Psalms how David, talked about the wonders of heaven. How great is the heavens. How great is the creation that you made. How wonderful you've made things. That's the same feeling that Nebuchadnezzar puts into this. How great are his signs, and how mighty are his wonders. This event that happens to Nebuchadnezzar was so startling and so miraculous that it just completely overshadowed anything that he had ever seen or experienced before. Now remember, this wasn't just some guy out, standing out in the field someplace. This was Nebuchadnezzar, the ruler of the world at that time. Probably the richest man in the world. His palace and his city were one of the wonders of the world. The Hanging Gardens are still considered to be one of the wonders of the world all these centuries later. How did they build that? How did they get water? How did they do it? They had hot and cold running water in the palace. I mean, how did he do that? Things like that. It's a miraculous thing. But yet that was all, it all paled in comparison to what God had done. This next is really interesting to me. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and his dominion is from generation to generation. This is saying his kingdom will never end. My kingdom will end. He saw the image. He knew his kingdom was going to end. But his kingdom will never... Who told him that? Who told him that the kingdom of God would never end? And his dominion is forever and ever. Who told him that? How did he figure that out? When we read this chapter, we begin to get, I think, a real insight into the mental capacity of Nebuchadnezzar. He was, I think, a very brilliant man. We sometimes look at these pagans, as being, kind of subspecies, they kind of come out with a drool on their lip, I'm going to take over the world. But this was a very brilliant man. And he was able to understand from the various things that happened in the first 3 chapters and the 4th chapter, who God was. And that God, this God, had a kingdom that was never going to end, even though all the kingdoms of the world were going to end, his would never end. And he had a dominion or a reign that would be forever. In other words, his reign was not going to stop. King Nebuchadnezzar could die, his son would take over, and the empire would continue. But with God, there was no stopping, there was no dying. His reign would be continuous forever. Real insight. Some people today that think they're smart have never figured that out. They think he's dead already. They don't consider him. All right, verse 4. I, Nebuchadnezzar, was at rest in mine house and flourishing in my palace. Picture Nebuchadnezzar. He's conquered everything he wants to conquer. He's no longer going to war. He's an older man, and he's decided that I'm going to retire to this beautiful retirement home that I built, his palace. I'm at peace. I'm not fighting anybody. Everything's going smooth in the government. Everything's smooth at home. He's flourishing. He is experiencing and living the life that he has prepared for. So here he is in his palace. I saw a dream which made me afraid, and the thoughts upon my bed and the visions of my head troubled me. Therefore made I a decree to bring in all the wise men of Babylon before me, that they might make known unto me the interpretation of the dream. Here we go again, right? How many times? Then came in the musicians and the astrologers, the Chaldeans and the soothsayers, and I told the dream before them, but they did not make known unto me the interpretation thereof. Now, our first look at this, I think we have to understand that this group of people that he called upon, this was a normal, if not daily, maybe weekly thing that he did. Anytime he needed advice, this is who he called in. Remember we talked about the Chaldeans and these guys. These were the scientists of their day. These were the very bright, smart guys of their day. These were the ones that figured out astronomy, astrology, mathematics, and all this sort of thing. These were all considered in this group. So if he had a question about something, it was logical this would be the group that he would call in. So it wasn't unusual. Notice, however, that this time, unlike the previous dream, when he said, you tell me the dream and the interpretation, or I'm going to cut your heads off, this time he just said, here's the dream, give me the interpretation. There wasn't any threats, there wasn't any, I want to know what this dream means. And notice his statement. He didn't say they couldn't, but he says, but they did not make known unto me the interpretation thereof. Now, if they did understand the dream, and I'm sure they understood at least some of what the dream was about, through fear, they did not tell him what that dream was. Hey, king, you're going to be a maniac. Oh yeah, right. That's it. Your head goes first, yours goes next.
And we know.
They knew Nebuchadnezzar. They knew him. Okay. So they wouldn't tell him. If they knew, they wouldn't tell him. But it's pretty obvious in reading the dream. We can probably figure a little bit of it out ourselves, just by seeing what it was. And I'm sure they were able to figure out quite a bit of it. Verse 8. This has a lot of people wondering sometimes, but we'll look at this. But at the last, Daniel came in before me, whose name was Belteshazzar, according to the name of my God, in whom is the spirit of the holy gods, and before him I told the dream, saying. Now right away people say, why wasn't Daniel in the first group that was brought in? You think Nebuchadnezzar should have learned his lesson. Bring Daniel in first, right?
Well, you want to give the underdog a chance.
What's that?
You want to give the underdog a chance.
Well, that's true, that's true. But we have to remember, Daniel was over all of these guys. He had been placed as their master. He was the boss. He was the manager. Now, if you go into the bank and you want to do some bank business, and you just want to go in and cash a check or make a deposit in the bank, you don't go in and say, all right, I want the manager first. Right? No, you go to the teller and you do your business. You only speak to the manager if you have some business to do that's extraordinary. It's not normal. You want to borrow $1 million, or you want to do something really out there. Then you go talk to the bank manager and he takes care of that. Or you're a businessman, you're doing that kind of thing. But the average person is going to deal with the teller. Maybe a loan officer if you're taking out a loan, but you're not usually going to go talk to the manager unless there's a problem. Now, if the teller can't help you, I want to speak to the manager, right? Okay, this is what happened here. Yes, friend.
I wonder if he didn't know that Daniel would be able to do it.
Oh, he knew Daniel could do it. We
But
can
he
see
just
that from the
wanted
words.
these other guys to try.
I think we have to remember that Nebuchadnezzar only had a dream. He may have had lots of dreams over the space of his lifetime that he had talked to the astrologers about. Intuitions and different things. Otherwise, why, they wouldn't be there, see? So this was just, to Nebuchadnezzar at this point, he was concerned, but it was not an extraordinary thing. It wasn't extraordinary like the image. This was different. And so, it was not unusual for Daniel to be the last one to come in, because, like I say, he had to give the underdogs a chance, but through fear of not being able to figure it out, Daniel was called. Interesting thing to note here, that Nebuchadnezzar, and Nebuchadnezzar's writing this now, calls Daniel by his two names. Daniel, his Hebrew name, Belteshazzar, his Babylonish name. That's interesting. You would think that he would only use Belteshazzar. Why would he bother to call him Daniel? Why would he even know that his Hebrew name was Daniel? There was a very good reason for it. If we go back up to this first verse again, he's writing a letter to the entire world, letting them know what happened. If he had not included the name Daniel in his writing, would the Hebrew children and children of Israel accepted what had happened? No. It would have been just some fairy tale from,
Oh, another one of his.
yeah, something out there. But by mentioning Daniel, he brought this home to the Hebrews. By mentioning Belteshazzar, he brings it home to the court of Babylon. Okay? So, and also, we look at this in our first reading of this, he says, his name was Belteshazzar, according to the name of my God. You would look at this in maybe a boastful way and say, I've named him according to my God. But when we finish this chapter, I think we'll see a different spin on maybe what Nebuchadnezzar is saying here. He's merely explaining that I named him Belteshazzar after my God at the time he named him. A little different, okay? Just got to keep that in mind. Notice he says, in whom is the spirit of the holy gods. That's interesting. He still, even in his letter, hasn't quite figured out there's only one. But he knows they're holy gods. And his theology isn't quite all there yet. There's still some gods, plural, up there somewhere. Little g's, by the way, not big g's. So his theology still isn't quite in place, but he's got the basic idea. And that Daniel has the spirit of the gods, or of God. Okay, not verse 9. O Belteshazzar, master of the magicians, because I know that the spirit of the holy gods is in thee, and no secret troubleth thee, tell me the visions of my dream that I have seen, and the interpretation thereof. He didn't bother to ask the magicians for the vision of his dream, did he? But he did to Daniel. And then he goes on to tell Daniel what that vision is. I find that kind of interesting. Why would he ask Daniel to tell him and then tell him? Maybe he thought, well, maybe I should tell him. I don't know. Thus were the visions of mine head in my bed. So he was in bed. I saw and behold a tree in the midst of the earth, and the height thereof was great. So he's in this vision, he sees this tree that's very high. The tree grew and was strong, and the height thereof reached unto heaven, and the sight thereof to the end of the earth. So he sees this big tree, and this big tree grows until the top of it reached into the clouds. Now, I don't think he meant to say it was up into the stars, but it was up into the clouds, and it was huge. And the thing to notice, it was visible from the ends of the earth. This is a big tree he's seeing here. This is really a huge, majestic tree. The leaves thereof were fair, and the fruit thereof much, and in it was meat for all. The beasts of the field had shadow under it, and the fowls of heaven dwelt in the boughs thereof, and all flesh was fed of it. So here's this huge tree. The cattle and the oxen are gathered under the tree in the shade during the heat of the day. The birds are landing in the branches. They're making their nests up there. There's fruit on this tree that men can eat of, and it's enough for all the men to eat. So this is really a huge tree. It's feeding everybody. So there's a lot of good things about this tree. There's a lot of good things about the tree. Keep that in mind. I saw in the visions of mine head upon my bed, and behold, a watcher and an holy one came down from heaven. Now, he didn't see two people here. That if you read the Hebrew, what he's defining the watcher as being a holy one. Now, what the watcher really is, from the text, nobody really can tell for sure. I mean, there's nothing textually that says he was talking about this. You know, it's the only time that it's used, so we don't know for sure what this is. The assumption is that this was an angel of some sort. The idea being that whatever this was, it did not sleep. And there's a throwback, some feel that there may have been a throwback to Ezekiel, the writing of Ezekiel, where he sees the wheel with the eyes, you know, that never close. That this may have been also something that was in the Chaldean history or writing, something about this very same thing. The idea that the eyes never close. So this would be the watcher. He's there to watch over the earth and never take his eyes off of it. Also in some of the, and I don't remember which country it was, one of the nations, one of the, not necessarily nations, but anyway, they had in their history, like the Greeks, for instance. This wasn't Greece, it was one of the other major ones. They had in their mythology 4 gods, or 4 watchers, they were actually watchers, that had responsibility for the earth, and they had 4 corners. And they watched the earth and they watched the universe continually, and they had this sphere that they were responsible for. And so they were constantly watching. So this may have also, maybe it was Syriac, I believe it was Syriac. That would have also maybe came to Nebuchadnezzar, because remember, he brought religion and everything from everywhere, and he was very studious. So he could have also associated this with one of those watchers. Whatever it was, he understood that this was somebody watching the earth and had some responsibility. And this Holy One came down from heaven. He cried aloud and said thus, "Hew down the tree and cut off his branches, shake off his leaves, and scatter his fruit, lest the beast get away from, let the beast get away from under it, and the fowls from his branches." Whoa. So we see here the idea that they're going to cut the tree down. Well, they're not going to just cut the tree down. They're going to completely destroy the tree. They're going to cut it down, just like we had a lumber guy come by, take a tree down, cuts all the branches off of it, takes the tree down, shakes off all the leaves, gathers up all the wood, hauls it off. You know, everybody get out of the way, this tree's coming down. That would have been a big job, you know, this is a huge tree. And no doubt this was troubling to Nebuchadnezzar in his dream. Why would they cut this tree down? That's strange. Verse 15. "Nevertheless, leave the stump of its roots in the earth, even with a band of iron and brass, in the tender grass of the field, and let it be wet with the dew of heaven, and let his portion be with the beasts in the grass of the earth." Now we start to get an impression of what this tree is. So we have this watcher commanding that the tree be cut down, that it be stripped of its branches and leaves, and fruit is scattered, but leave the stump with the roots in the ground. Now, you know, we have an idea of roots, stumps, you know, we cut a tree down, there's this ugly old stump out there, and we got to figure out how we're going to get rid of that stump. You know, we dig the stump out, right, or we blow it out, or we, depends on how, I had a friend of mine, he'd take a quarter stick of dynamite and drop it down there and blow them out. Did that once too often though, it was a little too close to a house and shattered all the windows. But anyway, you don't want to, some things you don't want to do, but
Kill him.
in this case, the watcher says, leave the stump with the roots in the ground. The idea here isn't that it was a dead stump. He said, leave the stump with the roots, with the living roots, with the germ of life still in the roots. Now, you know, around here, we got some trees and bushes. You can cut them things down. You can pull half the stuff out of there, but you leave one root in the ground and see what happens. I got a lilac bush. You can whack that thing down, and next spring, here it comes. All these suckers come up out of the ground. I got some kind of bush in the back. I don't know what these things are. I pull them out. I get my truck and pull them out, and if I don't get every bit of it out next year, here's another one of those things growing up there. And I have to go out there and cut it down again. Well, that's kind of what the watcher is saying here. leave the stump with the roots in the ground with the germ of life. And put a band of brass.
Sorry.
Oh, that you? Okay. I wasn't sure if it was her or me. Put a brand of put a band of iron and brass. Now, you first read this, you think about the stump with a band around it. But that's not really what he's saying. He's saying here, put a fence around it. Protect the stump. Don't let anybody pull the stump out of the ground, because it has the germ of life in the roots. Yeah? So that's what this is indicating here. In the tender grass of the field, we're going to leave this stump out there. We're going to put a fence around it in the field. Let it be wet with the dew of heaven, and let his portion. Now look at this all of a sudden. We went from a tree to let his. We went to a person. So we know now that this tree is a person. And let his portion be with the beasts in the grass of the earth. So Nebuchadnezzar had some idea who this tree was. I think he was scared to death that the tree was him. Because that him. When he knew perfectly well the tree was him. He's already been mentioned as, in different terms, but as being the great king over all the nations and all this. What better projection of that than this huge tree that feeds the nations and provides fruit to all of his people and rest and all the things that Babylon really did. We hear a lot about the bad part of Babylon, but we don't really hear a lot about the good part of Babylon. But it was there too, as in most cases. But this is about the king himself. Verse 16, let his heart be changed from man's, and let a beast's heart be given unto him, and let 7 times pass over him.
7.
Yeah, we'll get to it. 7 times. Okay, so here we have this king who is so mighty and basically perfect. If we look at it, this tree, perfect tree, no dead stuff on it. Now, trees love it. Everybody loves this tree. Head of gold on the image, perfect. Head of gold, pure. Same idea here, perfect tree, pure. God's is again giving us a picture of Nebuchadnezzar in the eyes of God. This is from the eyes of God, by the way. This isn't our rendering. This is how God looked at him and his reign. Now he says, let's take his heart. We're going to change his heart. We're going to change his nature. We're going to take the nature of man out of him, and we're going to put in a nature of a beast. Wow. And we're going to let this happen for 7 times that pass over him. Now this enters into the question, what is a time?
A year.
It'd be a year,
A time can be any
you would think.
duration. Time can be a second, time can be a minute, a day, a year, 10 years, whatever. A decade, it could be whatever. But in this particular case, the time is a 7, which was 7 years. So this was, Nebuchadnezzar would be in this position for 7 years. Now, when we get to chapter 9, when we start talking about the 70 weeks of Daniel, we find the same thing happens again. Times, and a half of times, is 3.5 years. So we're going to see this, the same thing happening again. Daniel seems to put times with 7 days, with a year, for some reason. Okay, verse 17. This matter is by the decree of the watchers, and the demand by the word of the holy ones, to the intent that the living may know that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and giveth it to whomever he will, and setteth up over it the basis of men. Boy, here we go back to Isaiah, right? Yeah. He wants the world to know that he is God and there is nobody else besides him. And by the way, I set up the kings and I take down the kings. This is what got Sennacherib in trouble, remember? Oh, look at everything I did. And God said, no, you didn't. I put you there. Remember me? Hey, I'm the one that put you there. The reason you won the victories wasn't that you were so great. It's because I made them weak. God said that. And he ended up having Sennacherib killed because of his pride. God said, hey, he's my tool. I'm using him. And here he is standing up saying, look what I have done. God said, we'll see about that. Yes.
That's what Herod did.
Yes.
Same thing.
Same thing. Yes. This is what happens to men when they have offices, when they get put in offices. You know, we just had this election, you know, and it's hard for us sometimes to fall back and say, you know, it doesn't matter, because God is going to put the man in the office that he wants in the office. Now, this is where the rub comes in. The rub is that we, as the children of God, dictate what God wants to do. And we haven't figured that one out yet. Look at the children of Israel. When the children of Israel followed God and put God first, what happened? God put up somebody in there that led them and took care of them. When they decided to turn to idols and turn against God, what happened? He put the kings in there that were really stinkers. Right? We should learn that. I've said it over and over again. The reason the United States is in the position it's in is not because of those dirty liberals over there that are bringing in all this stuff. It's because of the Holy Church that hasn't been praying and doing what it's supposed to be doing. And when we put him first, he will put the person in office that will bring righteousness again to this country.
Amen.
It's that simple. It's not through the electoral process. We can blame everybody that voted for this guy, you know, whatever, or that guy, whatever. No, that's not it. Blame the church. Put a square on our shoulders. We're the problem here. Sorry, that's the way it is. Okay, notice what he says down here. He gives it to whomever he will, and setteth it up, or setteth up over it the basest of men. Now we see this word base, a basest man, and we automatically think this is, you know, the scum that's crawling out of the gutters downtown or something. But really, this term basest of men means the humble and contrite man. So when God wants to choose a ruler, he's not going to go to the man who thinks he's really somebody. Now he will if that's what he needs to do, don't get me wrong. But for his druthers, okay, he wants to go after the humble man. Look at King David. You know, that kid is going to be the king? This scrawny little red-headed kid is going to be the king? Yeah. Look at Saul. Me? You know, he's a shepherd. Look at everybody God's put up that were righteous men. They were not the haughty, you know, raised in the king's court, really somebody. No. They were humble. And that's who God chooses. Why? Anybody? Why do you think?
So he gets the glory.
So he gets the glory. Hey God, I don't know. You're going to have to tell me. Now we think about Solomon. Solomon came. He went back and hid. He didn't want the job. He went and hid. So when he came up, he asked a very, you know, we look at his request to God and say, well, God, give me wisdom to lead your people. That was really a great request. However, the wisdom to lead your people, he didn't have the personality and the fortitude to go with the wisdom. Because it wasn't very long until it was Solomon's wisdom. It was Solomon's stables. It was Solomon's wealth It was the Queen of Sheba saying, I have seen everything and I cannot believe the wisdom and the beauty and the wealth of Solomon. And look what happened to him. So we have to be careful what we ask God for and understand that when He gives us something, we need to remain humble and contrite. And our leaders need to do the same. Okay. Oh. Verse 18. This dream I, King Nebuchadnezzar, have seen. Now thou, O Belteshazzar, declare the interpretation thereof, for as much as all the wise men of my kingdom are not able to make known unto me the interpretation, but thou art able, for the spirit of the holy gods is in thee. So we hear this again. All right, now notice what Daniel does. This Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, was astonied or astonished for 1 hour, and his thoughts troubled him. So here's the man of God standing there for 1 hour, contemplating. It doesn't say it took an hour for him to get the interpretation. It says his thoughts troubled him for an hour. You're standing in front of the man who can cut your head off. You're standing there understanding and knowing what is going on here from a heavenly point of view. And we're going to find out that Daniel had some insight that didn't even come from the vision. God gave him some real insight as to what was happening beyond the vision. Here he is standing there. I believe he knew the interpretation right away. But he spent that hour in astonishment, if you will, in awe, trying to decide how best to deliver the message to Nebuchadnezzar. You remember with the image, he had all night. He had the 3 Hebrew children and him, and they prayed all night, and he got the results, and he was able to work out how best to approach it. He only had an hour here. And then I want you to notice something, and this to me is interesting. You know, having read a little bit about the court life and things, notice what this says. It troubled him. He was there for an hour. The king spake. That's unusual. When he turned it over to Belteshazzar, to Daniel, you think the king would just sit back and wait, because that, you know, the court, in the court, that's what you would do. You had somebody who was of high esteem like Daniel. You'd give him all night if he needed to give you the dream. Why did he wait just an hour before coming back to Daniel? Interesting. The king spake and said, Belteshazzar, let not the dream or the interpretation thereof trouble thee. See, I told you, he was a pretty smart guy. He knew Daniel had the interpretation, and he knew Daniel was wrestling with how best to approach him with the answer. So basically what he was saying here is, Belteshazzar, I'm not going to cut your head off. Just tell me what the interpretation is. I understand you're the messenger.
You're only the messenger.
Yeah. You're just the messenger. You're not the writer. Give me the interpretation. Real insight coming from the king. Also, I think it shows what level, how Nebuchadnezzar felt about Daniel.
The respect.
He had this respect that he had earned that respect. Just as a little side note, we had our Thanksgiving dinner the other night for CMA. And for 20-some years, we've been riding with the hombres at their toy runs and going to their function. Let's go to the Lord in prayer. Dear Lord, again, we come to open your word, to partake of the things that you have for us tonight. And as we do, Lord, I pray that you'll remember those that are usually with us that are sick tonight, that you'll bring healing to them, bring comfort to them. Lord, you'll give them a speedy recovery. And Lord, as we go into your word, I pray you'll anoint your word, anoint our hearts to receive that you have for us. Let your word become alive and let it spring up as a well of living water. And those little portions that are for us and for each and every one of us, let them take root, Lord, and spring forth into the vine or the tree that you have for us. And we thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. Last week, page over here, we talked about King Nebuchadnezzar. I keep knocking the page down here. How he put up an image out in the plains of Dura, and it required that everybody fall down and worship that image. And of course we talked about the 3 Hebrew children who fixed their face on the Lord and said, we're not going to bow down. And because of that, they were thrown into the fiery furnace and of course came out without even the smell of smoke on them. The thing to take from this, from last week's lesson, was the reaction of Nebuchadnezzar. Remember, he blessed the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego because their God had sent an angel to protect them. And then he put out a decree that anyone who speaks against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego should be cut in pieces and their houses made a dunghill. Now, we remember we talked about that this didn't necessarily mean that Nebuchadnezzar was agreed that Jehovah God was the only God. He was a God as far as Nebuchadnezzar was concerned. He agreed now that this God of Daniel was a high exalted being, maybe the supreme being over all the other gods, but still didn't come to the recognition and acceptance that he's the one true God. He just kind of put him in his menagerie of gods and said, yes, this is one of our gods, and he's up here at a high level, probably higher than some of the other gods. So that's kind of what to keep in mind as we go into the lesson tonight. Was Nebuchadnezzar's mindset after the 3 Hebrew children came out of the fiery furnace. You remember back when Daniel first brought him the vision in the second chapter, when he was able to answer Nebuchadnezzar's dream, then he understood that Daniel had some kind of a special connection with a supreme being. Didn't really know who it was, didn't really put it in its proper place. Now he's kind of moved over a little bit more and said, well, here's God. Now he's one of the gods, and he's a supreme God. Let's see what happens today. So let's start with Daniel 4, starting with Christians and supporting their charitable things that they do, and witnessing to them, not sitting down and putting an arm and praying for them all the time. We have a few times, but most of the time just being there. You need something done, we're there to do it, just being a witness, just earning their trust. I don't know how many, it was about 13, 14 of them came to our dinner or more.
I think so.
Came to our dinner Saturday. Sat there and said, man, this is great. I talked to a couple, man, this is great. We're coming again next year. Now, that's a small thing. To most people, to us, that's a big thing. They don't do that. They don't do that. But you see, we have earned that level of respect. And not only that, they come to our dinners, they come and play by our rules. If you don't understand what I mean, someday maybe I'll explain to you, but when we go to their events, we have to kind of play by their rules, you know. I mean, they'll grab somebody and take ball bats if that's what they decide they want to do. If you do something wrong, you got to watch your P's and Q's. You just don't know what might happen next. But when they come to ours, all that's gone. They're just somebody else walked in with a different color patch, sit there and have a great time with us. So we've gained that respect that they put their things aside to be there with us. That's gaining respect. Took us 20 years to get there.
Oh, yeah.
But that's what Daniel did with Nebuchadnezzar. He gained the respect of Nebuchadnezzar. So it didn't matter what Daniel said. He was protected by the king.
I think the king was a little bit worried, though.
What's that?
I think Nebuchadnezzar was really a little bit worried about this.
Mm-hmm.
He had a hunch it was all about him, but he was a little bit worried about it.
Mm-hmm. And I don't know that he was as worried about the message as he was how he was going to say the message just right. You know, he had to worry about how the court, you know, in the court, the way you do things. But notice what he says. Belteshazzar answered and said, My Lord, the dream be to them that hate thee, and the interpretation thereof to thine enemies. In other words, what he was saying was, I wish this was about your enemies rather than about you. He didn't say it was, by the way. If you read this, it was about your enemies. No. He was wishing it was about his enemies and not about him. I truly believe that Daniel liked Nebuchadnezzar. Now, he was a captive there and all of that. But I really believe he saw in Nebuchadnezzar, he was able to see through the eyes of God and see Nebuchadnezzar. And see what Nebuchadnezzar was to God. And he liked Nebuchadnezzar. And this was his response. I wish it was to your enemies and not to you. The tree that thou sawest, which grew and was strong, whose height reached into the heaven, and the sight thereof to all the earth, whose leaves were fair, and the fruit thereof much, and in it was meat for all, under which the beasts of the field dwelt, and upon whose branches the fowls of heaven had their habitation. It is thou, O king, thou art grown and become strong, for thy greatness is grown, and reachest unto heaven, and thy dominion to the end of the earth. So here Daniel breaks the sad news, I think the king probably already knew it, that he was that tree. In here are some interesting things. Thy greatness is grown. Now, Nebuchadnezzar, you know, if you remember back in the first lesson, Nebuchadnezzar was the son, Nebuchadnezzar's father, rather, was quite old and was on his last legs, you might say. And Nebuchadnezzar took a portion of the army and went out and defeated the Egyptians with just a portion of the army. So he was held in high esteem to start with before he started his reign. He was already kind of a hero of Babylon, you know, kind of a thing. But much like a hero of Babylon, he was considered a military man. I mean, you know, here this kid takes this army, goes out, he's young, takes the army out, defeats. Oh man, hey, this is cool. We got a good general here. We got a good military man, knows how to do it. But from that beginning until now, when he's an older man, his greatness has grown. And he has become strong. What that word strong indicates here isn't that he was strong in might like a military man, but he had become strong because everyone in the world recognized him as being not only a good military man, but a politician, a smart man, a wise man, somebody who ruled the way a man should rule. Okay? So he had learned his lessons. He had grown strong and was now recognized as a strong person, not just a military strong person. Okay? And the greatness has grown and reaches unto heaven. That's a kind of a strange statement for Daniel to make, that your greatness reaches into heaven, except that Daniel understood that God was watching the kingdom. And the greatness of Nebuchadnezzar had indeed reached into the heavens. If not, God would not be talking with this and would not have shown him this vision. So he caught the attention of God. Now, God has used him, put him on the throne and all that. But his greatness and his growth had caught the attention of God. We'd seen him move from pure paganism now to where he understood there was a God that had all power, to where now God was put on a shelf with at least par above any of the other gods that Nebuchadnezzar knew about, You see, his theology had grown, his greatness had grown, his wisdom had grown, and caught the attention of God. And God is watching this. Okay? And thy dominion to the end of the earth. In other words, your kingdom, your reign, your influence, if you will, reaches to the end of the earth. Now, he may not rule directly over everything out there, but his influence has reached to the ends of the earth. All right. And whereas the king saw a watcher and an holy one coming down from heaven, saying, hew the tree down and destroy it, yet leave the stump of the roots thereof in the earth, even with a band of iron and brass and the tender grass of the field. And let it be wet with dew of heaven, and let his portion be with the beasts of the field, till 7 times pass over him. This is the interpretation, O king, and this is the decree of the Most High, which is come upon my lord the king. All right. So in other words, Nebuchadnezzar, you don't have a choice in the matter now. This is the decree from heaven. God has said this is what's going to happen. This is the interpretation, O king, and this is the decree of the Most High. I don't know about you, but if God was going to do something and tell me, and somebody walked up and said, this is the decree of the Most High, I think I'd be kind of, I'd be like Belshazzar later, you know, knees knocking together. Oh, the Most High has decreed this on me. I'm in trouble. And I'm sure Nebuchadnezzar got that. Verse 25. That they shall drive thee from men, and thy dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field, and they shall make thee to eat grass as oxen, and they shall wet thee with the dew of heaven, and 7 times shall pass over thee, till thou know that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and give it to whomever he will. So Nebuchadnezzar is going to be driven from men. He's going to live like an oxen or a cattle out in the field. Now, the way this writes, it's like somebody's going to come out there and say, okay, Nebuchadnezzar, you know, overtake him, throw him off of the throne, throw him out in the field, and put him in a fenced area and make him live like an ox. That's not really what happens here. Okay? This isn't something that somebody made him do. It's something he does to himself. And we'll see this in a minute. Notice the reason for this? Till you know. When you know, absolutely, without any reservation, you know. You know, they say you know that you know when you know that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men. Now this goes back to his theology again, remember? He said their theology was that they had the Most High, and then they had the undergods, and it was the undergods who ruled among men and walked among men, but the Most High never got involved with the things of men. That was their theology. And so that's why Nebuchadnezzar was pretty easy for him to say, well, Daniel talks to this guy up here. He goes to this Most High God, but this Most High God doesn't get involved with our stuff. It's just Daniel has his special phone line, talks to him. Okay? And that's kind of what he was thinking. But when you know, this is going to happen to you until you know that the Most High doesn't work through some second layer of gods. He interjects himself into the world and the life of mankind. And he is so intent on mankind that he sets up who he wants and he takes down who he wants, and he is the guy that's in charge of our everyday affairs here on the earth. That's what Nebuchadnezzar had to learn from this experience. Okay. Verse 26. And whereas they commanded to leave the stump of the tree roots, thy kingdom shall be sure unto thee, after that thou shalt have known that the heavens do rule. So the idea of the iron and brass was to make sure that during this 7-year period, nobody took over the throne. Nobody stepped in and said, hey, I'm going to be the new ruler. Nebuchadnezzar's gone. Let's kill him and do away with him. And he's out there. He's insane anyway. We're not going to worry about him. And I'm now the ruler. And I think it's very interesting in going through history. Nobody can really understand what happened during these 7 years. They have all the history of the kings of Babylon. You know, this guy ruled for 2 months and this guy ruled for this. There's nothing about what happened that anybody else took the throne or there was anybody else ruling during that 7-year period. Quite interesting. Now, it was not unusual, by the way, in Asia at that time for kings to be incapacitated for some period of time, and they would, their sons or someone in their family would carry on the ceremonial role, if you will. In other words, be kind of the head guy, but they're all of the servants, and the court continued as normal. And you think about it here in the United States, if something were to happen to our president, everything would kind of go as normal for a while. You know, I mean, we don't need him in banking decisions. He's kind of the guy between us and the rest of the world. That's our spokesman, and he has to make decisions, sure. But basically everything would go, if there was nothing extraordinary going on, everything could go just smooth without him. Really. Think about that. It really could. And so the same thing was here. If there was nothing extraordinary going on, things would just continue as they are. And that's kind of evidently what happened, although we're not sure of that. And evidently what happened during that period of time. Anyway, wherefore, O king, let my counsel be acceptable unto thee, and break off thy sins by righteousness, and thine iniquities by showing mercy to the poor, if it may be a lengthening of thy tranquility. This is some insight that Daniel gained. He said, Nebuchadnezzar, this is what's going to happen. However, I'm giving you some counsel. Let it be what I'm about to tell you now. Let it be acceptable. He wasn't talking about what he'd already said. He says, now I've given you the interpretation. Now let me give you some counsel. You're going to counsel King Nebuchadnezzar. Yeah, okay. Right. He said, let me give you some counsel. He says, let it be acceptable unto thee. Break off your sinning, your wickedness, by righteousness. Wow. What he's saying here is, stop being wicked. He doesn't mean that he was wicked about everything. But there were areas in that particular time in which there was a lot of wickedness that went on in all of these kingdoms at those days. He said, break that off by righteousness. And what he meant by that was, stop being wicked and do the things that let everyone know you stop being wicked. Don't just say, I'm going to stop and not make any change. Boy, does that sound familiar. Mm-hmm. Yeah. We have people come down, and want to get saved, and to me, we're far too quick to say, I'll say the sinner's prayer, you're saved, out the door, wonderful, have a happy life. Mm-hmm. And that's really not what the whole matter's about. Yeah, the repentance is great, but there should be a turning away from wickedness or sin. And that should be apparent.
There has to be.
Really. And sometimes, it's an automatic bang, it just happens, and other times people have to grow into that righteousness. I think about Tim here at the church, when he first started coming. He came in here from, kind of had to. There was a guy sitting behind the bench, says, you will, kind of thing. And look at how he has grown. It's not an easy thing, and he's not perfect. He probably won't be for a while. But, he's grown, he's turned, and you can see, you look at him and say, man, that's different. There's a change here. And that's what Daniel was counseling Nebuchadnezzar. Turn from your wickedness through righteousness. In other words, let it be righteous. Let people see that. Let them know that you've made that change. And then he goes on to say, and show mercy to the poor. In those days, I wonder how many people died building Babylon, building his palace, building his hanging gardens. One commentary I was saying asked the question, I wonder how many million died building the pyramids. Those guys weren't paid big wages, you know. They were nothing more than really than slaves that built those things. And I'm sure Nebuchadnezzar was the same situation. He brought over people, and they were forced labor to go do that. And did they get paid anything? Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. But here Daniel is saying, turn away from that, okay, and show mercy to the poor. Pay them a living wage. Give them what they need. Be merciful to them. If it may be a lengthening of thy tranquility. So you can live in peace in your palace. Looking around at everything that you have in retirement years, that they could be lengthened. In other words, maybe if you did this, maybe God would change his mind. And you could stay in your tranquility and it would be lengthened. Okay. Verse 28. I love this statement. And all this came upon the king Nebuchadnezzar. In other words, he didn't take the counsel of Daniel. And all this came upon King Nebuchadnezzar. Simple statement. This is the king saying this, by the way. And all this came upon King Nebuchadnezzar. He is telling this to the entire world. Hey, I had counsel that would have probably kept this from happening, and yet all of this came upon me. Hey, world, I didn't get it. See how extraordinary this is? This is Nebuchadnezzar. You know, this isn't some. This is Nebuchadnezzar, the proud man. Verse 30. The king spake and said, verse 29, I'm sorry. At the end of 12 months, he walked in the palace of the kingdom of Babylon. So here he is, walking in his palace, enjoying the beautiful artwork and all of the flowers and everything, and it's just a gorgeous place. Verse 30, the king spake and said, is not this great Babylon that I have built for the house of the kingdom by the might of my power and for the honor of my majesty? Look at this that I have built for my posterity. Look at this to let everybody know what I have done. Look at this that I built for my kingdom. So everybody could say, wow.
No pride there.
Yeah. Wow. Incidentally, where is it today?
Well, it was.
Babylon. Everything he built there is gone. But he's saying, look what I have done. Verse 31. While the word was in the king's mouth, there fell a voice from heaven saying, O King Nebuchadnezzar, to thee it is spoken, the kingdom is departed from thee. So here's Nebuchadnezzar in the garden, or in the palace, and all of a sudden there is this voice from heaven. Now I want you got to picture Nebuchadnezzar. You got to picture him. This voice came from heaven. What are you going to do when you hear a voice from heaven? Right? Up goes his head. Here's his voice. Where's his voice? Right? Snap a picture of that. You stand in the palace like this. There's a voice. And you hear this thunderous, I should have used my thunderous voice, but, you know, the thunderous voice, you know, come roaring down there. O King Nebuchadnezzar, to thee it is spoken, you know. And here's this voice, and here's his head up. The kingdom is departed from thee, and they shall drive thee from men, and thy dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field. They shall make thee to eat grass as oxen, and 7 times shall pass over thee, until thou know that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and giveth it to whomever he will. Notice this. That same hour was the thing fulfilled upon Nebuchadnezzar, and he was driven from men, and did eat grass like an oxen, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, till his hairs were grown like eagle's feathers, and his nails like birds' claws. That same hour. What that means in really, in the indication and what that's trying to say is almost immediately. So here he is looking up to heaven, and 1 second he hears the voice, and the next second he becomes a maniac. And he turns into a beast. Now, is that unusual?
Not on today's things that you watch on TV with kids.
Now some people, some writers have gone so far as to say that he physically changed. At that point he changed into something. He got long claws and hair, and he changed into a werewolf and went charging off to be something in the fields. No, that's probably far-fetched. But what did happen was he became a maniac. In other words, he lost his mind. And there are people, and this is not that uncommon an ailment. If you go into, not the western state, go in some of those areas, you're going to find people that think they're animals. They think they're a bear, or they think they're a wolf, and they act that way. Or they think they're made out of glass, and they're going along afraid somebody's going to break them. Well, there's all kinds of weird things that people, their minds, just, and that's it. That's what they are. And they just turn into something else. They're convinced that's what they are, so they go live that way. And there's, of course, different degrees of that. You can go down here in Skid Row, and there's people down there, and I'm sure Jim's familiar with some of them down there. They won't live like anybody else lives. I mean, they're convinced the only way they can live is on the street, living under, that's their life. They can't live in a house because, something's going to happen to them. They're almost at this point of being an animal, although they're not quite to that deal, but they have to live down there. That's their life. And they're, they believe that. And Nebuchadnezzar believed he was an animal. Now we see, we think about him running loose out in the woods or something, and probably not the case. I mean, they had beautiful parks and gardens and around the palace, and what they probably did was put him into one of the parks in the palace and locked him in. Mm-hmm. And he ate like the animals. Now, he didn't necessarily mean that he went out there and ate grass all the time, but he ate vegetables. He ate what the animals ate. So, pears, fruit, stuff like that. You go down to the zoo, and even the horses, where they throw a lot of fruit in there and apples and stuff for him. It's the same thing with him. He probably had a diet of vegetables that was thrown into him to eat. But nobody took care of him, and he didn't take care of himself. And over 7 years, what your hair would look like after 7 years, me, probably wouldn't make much difference. But a lot of people, 7 years, your hair is going to be out here like this. Your fingernails, if you don't trim them, you don't take care of them, toenails, they're going to get out there. And so they look like bird's claws or talons. That's the way he looked. And he was just insane is the best way to put it. Well, he thought he was an animal, so he lived like one. Now, we have some New Testament examples of this. You remember Jesus, after he calmed the storm, and by the way, it's interesting that before he was the sea walker and the storm quieter, he was a prayer. Remember, he said, you all get in the boats and go on. And he went up on a mountain to pray. And he prayed. And then after he prayed, then he walked on the water. And it's one of the stories, or the writers relates that he walked as if he was going to walk right by them. They're over there foundering, the ship's about to go under, and he's just walking along. I think he was walking along because he had an appointment with some demons that he had to cast out of some very strong people at the tombs. Oh, you boys having a problem over there? But when they called to him, he turned to them. A little this is a little thought I've been thinking about, is if you want to be a water walker, then you have to let God put you in a sinking boat. Because that's what he did. Anyway,
Steve,
yes.
in your notes, you have, his kingdom would be taken from him and given to another for 7 years.
The kingdom taken and given to another? Yeah, that,
That's what you have in your notes.
What's that?
This one. That's in your notes.
yeah, it's in my notes. The kingdom was taken from him and given to another. That did not mean that another ruler came on, but the kingdom was being taken care of by somebody else. In other words, he played such a dominant role in that kingdom. And you'll find out in a minute here how dominant that really was. How important a role he played, that was being taken over by somebody else.
Vice president.
Okay?
Yeah,
There
did-
wasn't another king appointed in there.
No, didn't he have, other people appointed to take care of different areas, like,
Yeah, the other people did their jobs, you know, but
So it just
he was
continued.
taken out of that central role and others took that role. It may very well have been that Daniel was a big part of that. No, we don't know. Okay, so, but in the New Testament, that's where I was going. When he got done walking on the water, he went over to, it says he came into the city, and the first thing that happened, Matthew tells us there was 2 men came running out of the tombs. And Mark and Luke talk about this same event and tell us that these guys came out, they were naked, you know, they lived in the tombs, they were away from everybody else, they were maniacs, lunatics, they happened to be devil possessed. And of course they came to Jesus and said, "What are you doing here? Don't bother us. You didn't come to bother us, did you?" And he hadn't said anything yet. Of course, he'd been praying on the mountain. And he, of course, cast the demons out, and they went in the swine. The swine fell into the sea, 1,000 of them. So there was a lot of demons in these guys. But we see in the New Testament the same idea. In this case, it was demon possession. It may have been with Nebuchadnezzar. I don't know. But I do know that they were very similar. They acted like animals, no clothes, ate what they could get, lived in the tombs, ran around, you know, and stayed away from people. So this is what he turned into. Can you imagine a king who had such splendor as Nebuchadnezzar to be in this condition? Just like that.
what gets me is for 7 years, nobody did nothing to him.
What's that?
The only thing that gets me is for 7 years he's like this, and nobody did anything to him. Nobody tried to take over his kingdom.
Well, because God put a band of iron around it, you see. That was God's promise, that they would not take his kingdom from him.
Well, it's just that that's so unusual,
Yeah.
and that shows that God
Yeah.
did that, because otherwise, somebody would have taken
Well,
it.
how many, it's surprising they didn't kill him in the first, I mean, that was just a normal event, seemed like, you know,
Yeah.
somebody would kill you and take over your kingdom.
He had to be
So,
protected.
yeah, very unusual.
Well, if he was living in one of those gardens, then people were probably throwing fruit in there for him.
That could be too, yeah. Of course, I don't know, they probably kept him away from the populace. He was in the palace, I'm sure, in a dark corner someplace. They weren't about, and they were probably, you know, and you know how politicians are. Oh, Nebuchadnezzar's away on business.
Yeah.
You know, he's taking a ship and he's going to the end of his
Yeah.
kingdom to go do something, you know, and here he is
Later.
running around like a maniac inside, you know. Oh my. Oh, all right. What verse were we at here? I've lost track of where we were.
34.
What's that?
34.
24, thank you.
34.
34. 34.
34, I'm on the wrong page, that's why I couldn't figure. Okay. His hair was like eagle's feathers, his nails like birds. And at the end of the days, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted up mine eyes unto heaven, and mine understanding returned unto me, and I blessed the Most High, and I praised and honored him that liveth forever, whose dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom is from generation to generation. Now, just reading this, we kind of get the impression his mind returned, and then he just lifted his hands and prayed. They tell us that this particular, one of the manifestations of this kind of lunacy that comes on people is that whatever you're doing last, when it hits you, the time that you're in this, you don't even remember it. You pick up exactly where you left off. And there were several examples cited of people. One particular guy, he was out with a, well, we call it a chisel and a hammer, and he was splitting fence posts with his sons, and he took the chisel and the hammer and he put it in a hollow tree so he'd go out the next day and work. And in the meantime, this hit him. And he was out for several years, 5 or 6 years. When he came to himself, he woke up and said, "Son, did you get that hammer and chisel that's in the tree?" He didn't know that he had for 5 years been a lunatic. The last thing he remembered was that, and that's right where he picked it up. And so we think about Nebuchadnezzar, a voice from heaven, here he is, got his eyes up there, lunacy hits him. When his right mind came to him, what was he doing? That was the last thing he was doing. So if you can picture him standing out there, and all of a sudden he comes to himself, he's looking up, and he sees his fingernails, and he sees where he is, and he remembers, Daniel told me this was going to happen. That's what the voice said. Okay, and in that context, look what he says. At the end of the days, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted up mine eyes unto heaven, and mine understanding returned unto me. He understood. He understood. Not just his right mind. He understood. If we could just understand everything that God wants us to understand, how much better our lives would be. But he understood.
Like I was saying tonight.
And I blessed the Most High. See, he's moved him up another notch in his theology. He's now the Most High. There's nobody higher. He's the Most High that liveth forever, and whose dominion is an everlasting dominion. And his kingdom is from generation to generation. This is where Nebuchadnezzar received the revelation of who God really is. He understood that for some length of time he'd been out there in that field. I don't know that he knew it was 7 years. I don't know how much he knew. He knew it was a long time when you get fingernails that look like that. When you got hair that looks like that, it took a long time. But this is a God who was in control the whole time. I could be taken out, I could die tomorrow. But this is a God who lives forever. And he doesn't die. He doesn't have to hand his reign off to somebody else. His dominion is forever and ever. And all the inhabitants of the earth are reputed as nothing. And he doeth according to his will in the army of heaven and among the inhabitants of the earth, and none can stay his hand or say unto him, What doest thou? See, he was transported to the New Testament. He had to have been. Because how did Jesus say to pray? Our Father which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Okay? Part of that prayer is what? Whatever happens in heaven, let it be your will on the earth. You control the armies of heaven. Control the armies of earth. Nebuchadnezzar says he controls the armies of heaven. He takes control of everything in heaven, and likewise that's on the earth. From his theology, this God not only controlled everything that happened in the heavens among the gods in his way of thinking, but this God also controls what happens on the earth. This is a different God than I've ever seen. This is different God. This is the Most High God. And none can stay his hand. This is an interesting statement. None can stay his hand. We think of this as nobody's going to stop and grab his hand. You know, God, when God decides to do something. What that word really means is, like you do to a little child, and when it reaches out and does something, you slap his hand. That's what this means. That's the words behind it. Who is going to slap the hand of God, of this God? Tell him he can't do
Same
something.
thing you'd ask your kid the rest of it too.
What's that?
The same thing as what you would ask your kid about the rest of that. What have you done?
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And who's gonna question what God does? Now, we remember in Isaiah, he says basically the same thing in Isaiah. He says, let's go into the courtroom, remember? Let's go into the courtroom. You're questioning my plan? Let's go into the courtroom. Whose plan is righteous? Whose plan is the right plan? Who are you to question me about my plan? Remember he talked about that in Isaiah. A couple of times he talked about that. See, God doesn't have, nobody questions God. The Bible says that God takes counsel with himself and with none other. He doesn't need anybody to give him counsel. He counsels with himself. Now, if we were to do that, somebody would say, this guy's a little strange, you know. But God, no, he can counsel with himself because there's nobody any greater. At the same time my reasoning returned unto me, and for the glory of my kingdom mine honor and brightness returned unto me, and my counselors and my lords sought unto me, and I was established in my kingdom, and excellent majesty was added unto me. Notice one little thing here. And my reason returned to me. Up here, it says, and I lifted mine eyes to heaven, and mine understanding returned to me. His understanding of what God was doing and God's position came to him. And at the same time, his reasoning, his ability to think, the brilliancy of his mind returned. And notice what happened here. For the glory of mine kingdom, mine honor and brightness returned unto me. Now that may seem a little strange. Here's Nebuchadnezzar, who just before that, was walking around saying, look at everything I've done. Now he's saying, for what? For my honor? No. For the glory of my kingdom and mine honor, and for the glory of my kingdom, mine honor and my brightness returned unto me. Not for my honor, not for my greatness, but for my kingdom's sake. See, I don't know if you catch this. It's kind of subtle. But before that, everything was for Nebuchadnezzar. His kingdom was for Nebuchadnezzar. His palace was for Nebuchadnezzar. Now he's saying Nebuchadnezzar is for my kingdom. Okay? I think he understood in his understanding the counsel of Daniel. Show your righteousness. What better way to say it? Whatever I am is for my kingdom. It's for my people. It's for my empire. It's for everybody under me. Complete change. Notice this also. The counselors and the Lord sought unto me. In other words, they sought counsel of him. Remember I said he was the kingpin. He was the guy that made everything happen in the kingdom. He was central. Well, when he was gone for 7 years, somebody else may have been making decisions, but he was not there to be central. Now, when everything returns to him, they came back asking counsel of him. So he was returned to that place. And I was established in my kingdom, and excellent majesty was added unto me. He went through this and came out the other side. And after he made these statements, excellent majesty was added unto him. You cannot put your trust in God and not expect to have things happen that are good and make you better than what you were. I don't care how good you are when you start. I don't care how excellent you are when you start. When you finally make that leap and you understand God and put him in his rightful position, he will bless you more than what you already have. That's the way he is. Verse 37, and I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honor the King of heaven, all whose works are truth and his ways judgment. And those that walk in pride, he is able to abase. So he's saying here, number one, I am going to praise and extol and lift up and glorify and honor the King of heaven. Now he's writing this to the whole world. This isn't something he's doing in a back room. Right? To the whole world. I'm going to lift him up, the King of heaven. All whose works are truth. He's saying here, he sees things as they are, and he reacts to things as they are. That's what this is meaning here. We don't often see things as they really are. We see things as we suppose they are. We see things as we want to see them. Saturday morning at our breakfast, CMA breakfast, our chaplain just had a few minutes, and he was just talking about the scripture where Jesus says, "Suffer the little children to come unto me, for such is the kingdom of heaven." How many times have we heard that? You know, suffer the little children. Oh, God loves the little children. But he said, you know, the reason he said that is because the kingdom of heaven is best made up of people who have childlike minds. When you talk to a child, and you know, your child when he's real little, you could say, "I'm the President of the United States." He'll go out and tell everybody, "You're the President of the United States." He'll believe you. He believes what you say. Right? There's no preconceived ideas. There's nothing to filter out things that you tell them. They don't have experience, and so therefore whatever you tell them, that's the way it is. We need to come to God that way, and when he tells us things, we have the faith to believe that's the way it is.
Trust him completely.
But we can't do that because we got too many filters up here. Well, he means that, but what he really means is, it could be that, but really it's probably this. Well, he doesn't really mean for me to do that, because that would mean that I couldn't do this, right? But Nebuchadnezzar says, God looks at things as they really are, and his reactions are to things as they really are. And that is what truth is. And his ways, judgment. Doesn't mean God's up there, you know, dealing out judgment on everybody. It means that he is just. Whatever he does is just. Now, wait a minute. Here's a guy that just came through 7 years of lunacy. You would think he would come out the other side and say, "God, you were just a little bit tough on me there." No. He's just. I deserved it. How do we know he means that? Because he said, "And those that walk in pride, he is able to abase.
And who should know better?
What's that?
And who should know that better than him?
Who should know better than him?
Yeah.
He understood, you see, that it was his pride that put him in the position he was. Last week, you know, who is going to take you out of my hands? Statement of 3 Hebrew children. Going to throw them in the fiery furnace. Who is going to take you out of my hand? And the first thing that they say when they came out of the fire, the first thing they answer to him, "Our God is more than able to take us out of your hands." You know, it wasn't the fire, it wasn't the image, it wasn't the bowing down. The important part of that whole thing was that Nebuchadnezzar made the mistake of saying, "Who's going to take you out of my hands? Who can deliver you out of my hands?" Well, God just looked down and said, "Well, I certainly can do it." And you know, 3 Hebrew children said, "God's going to deliver us out of your hands."
And if he doesn't?
If he doesn't, no. He said he's going to deliver him out one day if he doesn't deliver us out of the fiery furnace.
Yeah.
But either way, he's delivering us out of your hands. That was his answer. Yeah. He's more than able. Yeah. He learned. He learned finally. Okay, any questions?
I don't have a
There was
question.
a parallel with Joseph in Egypt, to the extent that he was given an Egyptian name.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
That seemed to be a common theme with was BT.
Yes, and that was really quite common in those days,
Yeah.
to give the names, when they took captives, they would give them names that was from their particular culture. In the case of Nebuchadnezzar, all of the three Hebrew children and Daniel were given names that praised their gods, gods of Babylon. And of course, there was this idea that if we gave them names, we separated them from their gods, from their religion, from their theology, they would blend into our society and our culture better. So there was this idea, not only take them from the city, take them from their religion, take them from their politics, take them from their way they brought up, change them completely, give them all new clothes, give them all new diet, give them a whole new look, give them a whole new religion, change their name, and they won't give us any trouble, and they'll blend right in and they'll be part of us.
You know, we get people these days like, we got a guy that works with me, Stan Chainlofsky, whatever. But he's changed his name to where it blends in with Stan Chain, rather than the long name they have from over in Europe.
Sure, yeah, and a
It's
lot of
like
people do that. Yeah, a lot of people do that. Any other questions, comments?
Well, I was just gonna say that on the signs and wonders, I thought it was kind of interesting because I think the first sign was the dream, the first dream.
Mm-hmm.
And the second, the wonder, was of God delivering the three out of the furnace. And that was on a non-personal level.
Mm-hmm.
But the second sign and the second wonder was on a personal level for Nebuchadnezzar.
Okay,
And I
good
think
thought.
that really hit home with him more.
Excellent thought, yes, yes. Signs and wonders, sure. Delivering them out of the three Hebrew children out of the furnace, the vision of the image, all of those things, yes, were certainly in the mind of Nebuchadnezzar, and very well could be the signs and wonders included in there that he was talking about, yeah, absolutely. Anything else? Okay, well, thank you very much. Yes. We'll see you all in a couple weeks.